have you come up with an alternative yet for Dodger debate?
No, we're not
Are we
coming up.
really gonna
We're
are we
not
really gonna stick with
we're
this?
not renaming the show.
Why not?
We've got a brand.
A brand?
Do you not look at the little title cards?
Anyone ever come up to you and be like, "I love Dodger debate"?
Yes, actually.
They named the show by name.
Yes.
Who? Your mom?
Um, Hello and welcome back to Dodger Debate. I'm Jack Harris, the LA Times Dodger beat writer, along with Dylan Hernández, our esteemed sports columnist. Dylan, had we recorded this 2 days ago, we'd have a very different topic of conversation. But this weekend, the Dodgers first lose Yoshinobu Yamamoto to a shoulder strain after he was taken out of Saturday's game early. On Sunday, they lose Mookie Betts to a broken hand after he got hit by a pitch in his left hand. And now they find themselves without two of their most important players, without two of the guys that this team was supposed to be built around. And while they're both supposed to be back in time for the postseason before the end of the regular season, while neither is facing surgery at the moment, it feels like these injuries and the ramifications from them are going to impact the team in a lot of different ways, especially when you consider the kind of roles that Mookie Betts had trying to become an everyday shortstop, that Yoshinobu Yamamoto had trying to adapt to Major League Baseball and establish himself as a true frontline caliber guy. And if they're going to be missing extended periods of time, right now it could be a couple weeks for either of them. It could, be as long as a couple months, depending on how they recover. I think it's tough for them to fill both those roles. It changes the calculus of how this Dodger team is built and how this roster is going to work in a postseason environment. So for you, how big of a deal is it, considering the fact that they'll be back, considering the time they're going to miss from now until then, and how it's going to impact not only them, but the team at large, and sort of, kind of what we thought this team might be able to look like, and the differences now, in the wake of these injuries?
Yeah, I think the problem, right, is that, this Betts at shortstop thing, this Yamamoto as, say, a game two starter in a playoff series, these weren't like sure bet type of things, right? I mean, these were kind of experiments, borderline, and it's weird to call, Yamamoto, who's signed like the richest pitching contract in history, to be kind of a Hail Mary, but it kind of was, right? It felt like a long shot, of either of those guys being able to kind of fulfill those roles in October. And, the one great thing about the Dodgers is that because of their depth, right, they can just kind of outlast everybody. Getting to October is not the problem, and the regular season almost kind of becomes preparation for October, and I think that time was very important. I was talking to, someone in the organization not too long ago about Mookie Betts. To be honest, like I'm not really too sure about, whether he can, be a championship, the type of shortstop that plays shortstop for a championship caliber team. This person was a little bit more optimistic, but the point was, we had time to kind of find out. And now all of a sudden that time is gone. My guess is that at this point you can't just, when he comes back, and it's going to be at least a couple of months, right? The assumption was that he just, before he went down, he still wasn't really that shortstop that you wanted in the playoffs. He was going to use this time to kind of prepare for that. So you're not going to just throw him back out there at short. Yamamoto, he was looking after that Yankee game, like, okay, maybe he can be a number two starter in the playoffs. And now all of a sudden, he's probably down for a couple of months. And so, can you really count on this guy to be that guy? What happens when he ramps up next time, right? I mean, the whole issue too about the pitch mix. When he was in Japan, he did not like throwing the slider. He thought that the slider, gave him some elbow problems. And against the Yankees, he threw more of those than he had all see. You look at the just kind of the, all that pitch tracking data stuff. He didn't throw a single one in the first month of the season, right? And all of a sudden, come month two, I think he kind of realized, like, okay, I need something to probably complement, right, the fastball and stuff. And so he started throwing it. And now you kind of have this problem where, okay, well, if he throws it, he's going to get hurt. If he doesn't throw it, he's going to be bad. And that just kind of, it seems like a tough situation for you to be, looking at him as your number two starter. So, yeah, you can't, I think, and this is, like I said, I think that regardless, they were probably going to have to make these moves anyway if they really were serious about winning a World Series this year, right? They were going to have to find a shortstop. They were going to have to find, again, another frontline type pitcher. Part of the problem is though is that those guys really aren't around in the market right now. Adames might have been available, in the off season. Now that the Brewers are in first place, I'm not sure that happens. And then, on the pitching side, Corbin Burns, Dylan Cease, those guys, they're already off the board pretty early. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem now, right? They have to make deals. I'm not sure there's a deal out there.
Yeah, and that's why, like, of the two injuries, I look at the Yamamoto one as kind of the more difficult one for them, and a lot of reasons. We've talked about it in the past. The last two Octobers, for all that the Dodgers had go wrong on them in the playoffs, one of the key things was they did not have that elite level starting pitching to bail them out when their lineup was struggling, when they couldn't hit with runners in scoring position, when they had an error, defensively. Like, all those little things came back to bite them because they didn't have enough guys, or last year, any guys that could go out there and give you 6, 7 strong innings. And there's not a lot of them in baseball. This is a point that the Dodgers front office has made when the rotation questions have come up in years past. But, there's a reason that even at the end of spring training, the Dodgers showed interest in Blake Snell before he signed with the Giants. Why, going into this winter, like, Corbin Burns was one of the guys that it looked like they were really going to aggressively target before they pivoted to Glasnow and they got Yamamoto, but was somebody who, back at the start of the winter, you're maybe thinking, okay, well, he could still be around at the trade deadline. If something goes wrong, we could maybe try to get him. But to your point, he's gone. Dylan Cease is gone. Like, the best pitchers you're talking about maybe being able to get at the deadline are like a Garrett Crochet if the White Sox decide to move him. But that's a guy who would cost a lot. He's got years of control left. And then it's, less caliber kind of arms. It's a Tyler Anderson. It's a Luis Severino, a Jack Flaherty. These are guys that the Dodgers have either had in the past or poked around on in the past. And like last year, like, Jack Flaherty was a name they considered but didn't go after because it didn't really fix their problem, which was not having an elite level starting pitcher. You're in the same boat now, which is you're really relying on Tyler Glasnow to stay healthy, which is not something that's happened over the course of a full MLB season before. You're going to really be relying on one of your young guys, whether it's a Gavin Stone or Bobby Miller, to take that next step, that legitimate next step, to where they are pitching like a playoff caliber starter, which is something that, for all of the pitching that the Dodgers have developed in the last couple of years, whether it be because of injuries or just poor performance or whatever, like, they haven't had enough of those young guys at that level in a postseason environment. Maybe Walker Buehler can figure some things out the longer he gets away from the second Tommy John and the more he pitches this year. But so far, that hasn't been overly encouraging. And then Clayton Kershaw's, he's coming back, but he's coming back from a major shoulder surgery at age 36. So, and then even when, like, Yamamoto does come back, he'll be coming back from at least some sort of severe shoulder injury, one that's going to keep him out for a while. And the longer he is out, the less time he's going to have to try to get back into form and try to look like that guy who pitched against the Yankees. Oh, and by the way, the one time he did really, really look like a playoff starter, he was hurt the next week. So that's why, in my mind, like, the Dodgers lineup is always going to be good as long as their star players are good. And I trust that Mookie Betts is going to have enough time with this kind of injury to come back and be a good hitter again. I trust that even if they can't go out and get a shortstop, like, the lineup, if it's clicking, is going to be good enough that if it's some sort of combination of like Miguel Rojas or Kike Hernandez over there, or some, maybe you could go get like a Paul DeYoung or somebody like that, but you can work around that. What you can't really work around if you're the Dodgers, or at least what they haven't been able to the last couple of years, is that lack of frontline elite level starting pitching. And now it's all on Tyler Glasnow's shoulders. It's more responsibility on the young guys, and it's a lot on Yamamoto for when he does come back to try to get to that level. And that is a much more dubious calculation of things that have to go right than a couple of weeks ago when Glasnow was pitching like a Cy Young contender, when Yamamoto showed that next level of stuff in Yankee Stadium. You felt really good about the rotation, probably the thing maybe you felt best about on the team. Now it's as big of a question as any they have, again, barring Yamamoto coming back and being back at top form by the end of the season, which is just not something that I think, if you're the Dodgers, you can be entirely counting on at the moment.
Yeah, they do have a lot of, if you want to take the glass half full view, right? Glasnow has pitched like that guy. They do have a lot of
glass half full. Wow, look at you.
They do have a lot of these, like irons in the fire. Now, will they kind of shape into what they're hoping? Like, to your point, you really don't know. One thing that is, I think, a little troubling, right, is that, you're looking at guys like, Kershaw, Buehler, that are, expected to kind of be in the mix. Given the types of injuries they're coming back from, I imagine they're not like relief candidates, right? Because 2020, if we're going to be honest, right, it wasn't they had Bueller there. Then there's a bit of a drop off after that. And Urias was kind of able to be that guy that moved to the bullpen and, kind of plug some of these holes that they had there in that way. And I just think, right, again, with Kershaw, Bueller, you're kind of limited in how you can use them. Do you look at any of these guys? I don't know, Bobby Miller. Like, is there anybody that could be Julio, of 2020?
I think, I mean, I don't think it's out of the question for Walker Bueller to maybe do something like that, especially if he continues to struggle, and starts. Like, his biggest problem hasn't been that the stuff isn't so much there. It's more like, okay, how do I, with what I have now in my arsenal, how do I make this work every 5 days over 5 or 6 innings? I think Bobby Miller stuff wise kind of profiles that way, but at the same time, this is a guy that we'll see how he looks. He's coming back from a shoulder injury of his own this week on Wednesday. But if he's pitching well, you probably want to keep him in the rotation. To your point, in 2020, it did work. But part of why it worked was A, like Walker Bueller was really good in a lot of key moments that postseason. B, they had, that year with the schedule and the playoffs, like having like the starting pitching was a little more neutralized, right? When you're playing every day in a postseason environment, depth is a little more important. That's not going to be the case this year. And yeah, you can make it work with Glasnow and a collection of, maybe getting 4 or 5 innings out of Gavin Stone in game 2 and 4 or 5 innings out of Bobby Miller in game 3. And maybe Dustin May comes back and is one of those swing guys in the bullpen too. It's just that like the Dodgers have tried that plan the last couple of years. They've tried to do we don't have a traditional 1, 2, 3 in the rotation like a team like the Phillies does, like a team like the Yankees looks like they're going to have. Again, like we've talked about a lot doing these shows and what we've written, like we're not sounding the alarm on the Dodgers being a bad team all of a sudden or losing a 7-game or 8-game division lead in the NL West and missing the playoffs. Like this is still a really good team that's going to win a lot of games. Even if they played like 500 ball the rest of the way, like they're probably going to win the division. They might still even get a bye. Like you'd be in the mid to upper 90 win total at that point. The challenge is this is a team that has to win the World Series to have a successful season. And one of the things we talked about going back to the winter was that, yes, getting Glasnow and Yamamoto, you added a lot of talent for a lot of money, but a lot of talent to your rotation. But you also added guys who have not been able to pitch over a full length of an MLB season. So something like this, to me, you built your team to have like 2 guys at the top of the rotation. Problem was you probably should have also been aware of or trying to counteract against the threat of something exactly like this happening, of one of these guys breaking down. And now that you're in this spot, it's just like there's not a lot of clear answers. Now, that's not to say there are no good ones. I think it's very possible that Gavin Stone continues to kind of have the kind of year he's having and is somebody who is good for you in a postseason environment. It's very possible Bobby Miller comes back and can be somebody who's a solid postseason option for you. It's possible you could go out and trade for a guy who, like a Tyler Anderson or Flaherty or whatever, a guy who we wouldn't consider a frontline starter when you get them, but who outperform expectations and are good in the playoffs. It's just that you don't have an obvious answer now. Like it was so much easier to believe in this pitching staff when you had Glasnow and Yamamoto anchoring the rotation. Like everything else kind of fell in around it. And now you're back in that spot where you're asking guys to take on bigger roles, to do things they haven't done before, to maybe outperform what you're expecting, which again, it's a baseball season. That's going to happen. Like that's what makes great stories, when teams can overcome stuff like this. But just in the Dodgers case, it is very jarring to go from a team that, yeah, we've been pointing out a lot of their flaws and some of the ways like things could maybe go wrong in October. But now you look at the roster and kind of how things shape up and long term, these are real concerns, I think, for the first time, and ones that, again, internally, there aren't any obvious options. Externally, there aren't any obvious options. And it puts a team that, for all the money they spent this winter, back in a spot where they got to start trying to come up with answers and maybe think outside the box or rely on guys in ways that they probably weren't planning or hoping to have to rely on them this year.
What's kind of disconcerting here too is with Yamamoto, right? Is that I think it being a shoulder is worse than it being an elbow. And you have to kind of start looking even beyond this season now, right? I mean, what kind of contract is this, and how, what kind of insurance do they have on it, right? I assume
they had a Tommy John clause, not a rotator cuff clause.
Right. Yeah. And That's kind of the thing too about shoulders, right? I mean, you talk to anybody that's undergone shoulder surgery, I mean, kind of what happens is, you know, when they fix it, it gets tight, right? All of a sudden, your range of motion gets a little bit more limited. It's why it's kind of tougher to come back from than like an elbow thing, you know? So, yeah, that's kind of a scary one, I think.
I mean, I don't want to, it's not apples to apples for a lot of different reasons, but like Clayton Kershaw last year. Now, it seems like his ended up being much more severe than what they're describing Yamamoto's as at the moment. And obviously, he was at a different stage of his career than Yamamoto was. But that's a situation where a midseason shoulder injury, try to give it a rest for a couple months, ramp back up at the end of the season. And then what happens in the playoffs? His stuff wasn't as good. He gets knocked around, and somebody you thought you could count on. Remember, the Dodgers thought they could count on Kershaw to some extent last year because of how well he still did in the regular season, even with diminished stuff. But it's different in October. Like you need a different level of of stuff and execution. And like Dodger people were really excited about how Yamamoto looked in that New York series. Like that was the whole thing about that start in New York was this was a guy who had kind of been competing and grinding his way to decent numbers to start his big league career. And then finally flashed that like elite caliber stuff that makes you dream about October, that makes you think like, okay, between this and Glasnow, like suddenly we have as good of a 1-2 punch of starting pitchers as any team in baseball. And that's gone now. And I think it's even like we've talked about, even if he comes back, like it's all these uncertainties that I think fundamentally change the way you look at the Dodgers rotation. I want to get back to Betts real quick too, because I think there's a similar dynamic here, just maybe not as extreme. But again, like we talked about, the Dodgers right now were built to give Mookie Betts time at shortstop, see if he could develop enough to be a legitimate option there for you in the stretch run of a season, in the playoffs. And also, like him being there alleviated some of their other roster issues. It allowed Miguel Rojas to play a little bit less and platoon at second base and actually be pretty productive in that kind of role. It's kept Gavin Lux from having to be an everyday player as he tries to figure out his swing coming back from injury. It allowed some of their other utility guys like Kike Hernandez, like Kevin Biggio, who they traded for last week. You know, you could plug them into different spots knowing that, well, at least we have an option at shortstop right now. Like you mentioned at the top of this show, I think if Mookie Betts misses any sort of extended period of time, I'm talking, you know, a month or two, it's very difficult for me to imagine a world in which he's coming back playing shortstop every day and doing it well enough for the Dodgers to feel comfortable about having him at that position in the postseason. And if that's the case, again, it becomes a question of, okay, so what do you do? Are you just go Miguel Rojas and Kike Hernandez in that spot the rest of the year? You can probably get away with that defensively, but that's obviously not the most enticing option, especially given some of the bottom of the order struggles the Dodgers have already had. Do you try to go out and get somebody? I mean, we talked about Willy Adames. I think, you know, whatever window there was to try to swing a deal there is probably closed by now. Maybe Toronto will move a Bo Bichette if their season goes a little sideways, but that seems pretty unlikely at the moment. It's not as big of a problem because, again, I think you're still going to get, in all likelihood, Mookie Betts' bat back into the lineup at the kind of level you would hope for. But fitting all the rest of the pieces in together to me seems like more of a challenge. Like how big of an impediment do you kind of see that part, see his role moving forward, and how the Dodgers handle the shortstop situation now?
Yeah, you know, honestly, as I was kind of sitting here, I wonder, you know, and right, everybody who's kind of sitting at home, right, and kind of views this in very like simplistic terms, like, okay, every team's trying to win and whatever. You have to remember these are people's like jobs, right? You know, and a lot of kind of professional sports is about how do I not get fired, you know, and kind of assigning blame and kind of that whole thing, right? Pointing the finger here and there, and you know, kind of doing it off the record to people like us. It's kind of part of this game that happens. And as I'm sitting here, I'm just kind of wondering, does Mookie Betts kind of become the next Clayton Kershaw? In that, you know, Kershaw, I felt for like a long time was everything that the front office didn't do, they kind of he was set up to be kind of that fall guy, and right, because you know obviously he's going to pitch in a big game. It's kind of set up for him to, okay, if he messes up, that becomes the story now, right? Is that like, well, Clayton Kershaw messed up, right? I mean, he's the guy out on the field, and
Right.
people kind of forget like what the front office didn't do, or why is Kershaw pitching on short rest again, or why is he pitching in relief all of a sudden, right? Like those questions don't get asked because kind of the shock of that, right, that big moment just kind of overwhelms everything. And honestly, as I'm kind of sitting here right now, and I kind of look at what the shortstop options are out there, and like you know, even right, and the ones that are in house, I'm just kind of wondering if they just kind of throw him out there. You know what? He makes a mistake. Hey, you know, hey, Mookie blew the game, right? Um, I don't know. To me, that would
You're not going glass half full anymore. I see.
no. I mean, that to me seems kind of par for the course here, right? I would actually be more surprised if they actually went out and legitimately kind of tried to solve this problem. I mean, you look at a lot of, and I know you've kind of been right. We've been talking about maybe writing a Chris Taylor column, and I kind of don't like I really don't like going after like the last guy on the roster or whatever. But
Hey,
the fact,
he
right?
hit a home run this weekend, one of the bright spots.
That's the thing though, right? It's like the fact that like he's kind of still around, right? I mean, and a lot of it is because they gave him a big contract, right? And they kind of don't want to like admit, right? Hey, you know what? We just screwed up here. And sometimes you kind of have to, right? Now, some organizations, I think, right, they're almost too liberal with that too, where it's like, I mean, you look at the Angels, it's like they sign a guy, and however many months later, it's like, okay, goodbye. I'm not necessarily saying you should do that. And granted, Chris Taylor, I do think, given his history of big playoff moments, like I personally don't mind extending him a little bit of rope, but like, not everywhere does he survive this long, I think, and yeah, so I don't know. If you were to ask me who's going to be starting a shortstop, I mean, as much as I say, like, I don't think Mookie Betts should be the shortstop come October, given all the time he's going to miss and, all the ground he still has to make up there. And then this, by the way, I do want to say what he's doing is incredible, right? I mean, to be doing what he's doing, picking up the hardest position, basically something he hasn't done since doing that at the highest level is incredible. It's mind blowing.
I literally went looking for a comp when I wrote about this the other week, and like Honus Wagner was like the closest thing I could find, and even that was, very different from what Mookie Betts is doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, I mean, honestly, like you think we want to comp is like Michael Jordan playing baseball, right? Like
Very similar. I was asking people like those kind of questions, like, does he have to like remake his whole physique of his body to do this? Which apparently, typically, the answer would be yes, except because it's Mookie Betts and he's so athletic and gifted. Like he's one of the few people that could even just do this like on the drop of a dime, in the middle of spring training. Like, hey, go play shortstop full time now. Like that's how difficult this whole experiment has been.
Yeah, and yeah, so I just do want to make that clear. What he's doing is incredible. I think it's, he's, obviously a Hall of Famer as a right fielder, and even kind of moving to second base, I thought was pretty incredible. This is just kind of like a whole different level of that. But like, yeah, so that said, I don't think he's going to be ready to be playing shortstop there. But if you put a gun to my head right now and ask me who's starting game one of the NLDS at short, I'd probably say Mookie Betts.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a lot also depends on like Miguel Rojas, because I think that is the one guy on the roster that you can get away with having there because his glove is so good, because his bat's been better. I mean, the biggest issue with him is it doesn't seem like he can hold up playing every day at this stage of his career. Like he's only started 30 out of 73 games so far, in part because he's had leg soreness. He had some minor like things pop up last year the more he played, after Gavin Lux got hurt. So like that's where the imperfectness of that fit comes in. But he's at least somebody, and this is why, again, barring the Dodgers being able to go get like a legitimate everyday shortstop, I don't know if there's going to be a ton of urgency for them to make a move at that position, because they have him and because you can talk yourself into, hey, he can start most of the playoff games probably. I think what's interesting to me is like, what does that mean for Mookie Betts? Is he going back to playing everyday second base? In which case, what do you do with Gavin Lux? Do you convince him to go back out to right field, even though I think he's clearly at a stage in his career where his preference is to stay on the infield full time? Can you maybe get him back to a point where he's playing second base some days, shortstop the others, and you can kind of platoon Rojas and Lux, similar to what they did at the start of the season? But again, you're shaking. All of these scenarios are much tougher than the either Mookie Betts got another couple months to get better at that position, and like that, I think is going to be like the toughest part of this is you just aren't going to have as strong of a confidence level in what he can do there or what he can, especially if he comes back and you keep trying to do it and it kind of looks good or not. Like if the playoffs started tomorrow, I think it'd be kind of similar, right? Like if he was healthy, like would he be the starting shortstop? like you'd probably say no, like his defense hadn't graded out well enough, I think, for you to feel comfortable there. But at the same time, like maybe because there were times he does make good plays and he was showing an increase in comfort level of getting to different kinds of balls and making different kinds of throws. And without having the full 6 months of a regular season to like perfect that, it's just another way that these injuries, while not knocking these guys out for the entire season, to me fundamentally changes who this Dodgers team is, how good they can potentially be, and the level of difficulty it will take for them to get there. So I kind of end here, compared to how you felt Friday about this team and their championship hopes and whatever, like how differently do you look at their status as a World Series contender, their ability to make an extended postseason run and to overcome this stuff in the meantime? Like, have your feelings on this team and its capabilities and potential fundamentally changed with these injuries?
Not too much, to be honest, because like I said, I think both of those things, right? The Yamamoto being a legit two and Mookie being like a capable shortstop. I was kind of a no on both of those, right? To me, both of those felt like long shots and kind of the right that lottery ticket that got played now is just all of a sudden it's right the 40-1 long shot basically. That horse is now headed to the glue factory, right? And you can just throw the ticket away, basically. So in that sense, no. And maybe, could be a blessing in disguise in the sense that maybe they're going to have to confront these issues, sooner, right? Maybe before they were kind of deluding themselves into thinking, well, you know what? It's Mookie Betts, right? Like, I mean, just who he is, his talent as a player, his character as a person. And you could kind of, I could see why, I mean, I talked to people that were like legitimately thinking like, hey, he can do this. It's Mookie Betts, right? And
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that
when it
they
gets
were
put
still
like,
playing him every day.
yeah, right. And when it gets put like that, you kind of like, well, yeah, maybe, I guess, right? Like and I wouldn't, you can't totally count out Mookie Betts in anything, I think. But now they've kind of been pushed to that point though, and the good thing is they have time now, right? To do things. A lot of things can happen. I do think if this was 2 weeks before the trade deadline, this is a lot scarier, right? Because a lot of things can happen now. Teams that are in it can just like start free falling. Um, you know, Again, job security is always kind of an issue, right? The biggest alibi any GM can use is their farm system, right? Yeah, the major league team stinks, but you know what? I got kids coming up. You should see the guy we just got. The owner hasn't never seen this kid in Double A. So, maybe again, maybe the circumstances change between now and then to where they can, put something together.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was maybe a little bit more of a believer in some of these things than you were initially, which is why, like, to me, these are big deals, especially the Yamamoto part, as we've talked about. Like, to me, you can't overstate the importance of having those kinds of starting pitchers in the playoffs. And in the last week, Yamamoto went from looking like more of a sure thing. Like after that Yankee start, that was the most bought in I had been to him. That was the first time I was like, okay, this guy has it in him to just overpower a really good lineup in October. And now I have a tough time believing that like that's how things are going to shake out, at least for this year, given the circumstances. And because of that, like to me, that's a fundamental change for how good this team can be. They still should have as good of a chance as any team in baseball to get to the World Series and win it. But their path to getting there, I think, has just gotten a lot more complicated and difficult. And like you said, it's going to force them to reevaluate their roster in a way leading up to the deadline that they probably weren't going to have to do otherwise or might not have done otherwise.
It's going to come down to Clayton Kershaw. It always comes down to Clayton Kershaw.
I mean, it might. Like that's one of the things.
Conspire.
Like no offense to Clayton Kershaw, but this year, you like things probably went wrong if Clayton Kershaw's having to start a playoff game, and suddenly it's like, oh well, one more bad thing happens here or there, and like Clayton Kershaw, game 3 starter in the NLDS,
And that's the thing,
sure.
right? Like, I mean, kind of going back to what I was saying about Mookie Betts, right? I mean, for a long time, that's always kind of been the logic with Kershaw too. It's Clayton Kershaw, right? And even last year, it's like it's Clayton Kershaw, and I was kind of like, yeah, it's let's see what happens.
Anything else with this team you want to talk about? Things were kind of, I'm not gonna lie, we were kind of
Ohtani hit a couple of, I mean, the home runs he hit in the last week were all like bombs, right? I mean, the two he hit yesterday, the one that he hit to to left center. My God, I thought he looked. Yeah. I mean, yeah. What's to say about those two that he hit? Right. I mean, those. You know, he gets a little more into them. Those things
Shohei
are
Ohtani, good
yeah,
player,
good.
great analysis. This is just like when I asked Dylan for a wine recommendation the other day. He goes, "Oh, just get the most expensive one on the menu." Like, oh yeah, thanks.
Have you come up with an alternative yet for Dodger debate?
No, we're not
Are we
coming up.
really gonna
We're
Are we
not.
really gonna stick with
We're
this?
not renaming the show. We've
Why not?
already got. We've got a brand.
A brand?
Do you not look at the little title
Has
cards that
anybody
Pops
come up
makes
to
for
you
these
and be
videos?
like,
It's
"I
Dodger
love"?
debate.
Has anyone ever come up to you and be like, "I love Dodger debate"?
Yes, actually.
Really? They named the show by name.
Yes.
Huh? Who? Your mom?
Um, no. Well, yes, but yes, I've had actual like Dodger affiliated people.
They like it.
Yeah, they said they watch it. Is that not an endorsement enough?
No, it is, but like I was surprised that they like named it by name. Like I watched Dodger debate. Maybe we should call it like Dodger's Dungeon or something because it's taking a very dark turn here.
Not everything has to be an alliteration, Dylan.
Yeah, I like Dodger's Dungeon. That's my yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna veto Dodger's Dungeon as a name. So until the next time we do Dodger debate, I'm Jack Harris for Dylan Hernandez. We'll have a lot of coverage on all things Yamamoto, Betts, Dodgers related on LA Times Sports. So follow along and thanks for watching.